Chapter 9, Roald's Hut. I laughed at exactly the same jokes that children laugh at, Roald once said. He looked at the world in the same way a child does, and he didn't really trust adults. Of course, he would be good at making up stories for children. Roald worked on the script for the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He didn't get along with the director. I'm guessing that's who was in the picture on the other page. Roald was known for being hard to work with. He was touchy, too blunt, and very stubborn about making changes. He lashed down at anyone who didn't like his work, and Roald Dahl's books had many critics. Some grown-ups hated Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. They thought it was tasteless, rude, and too unpleasant for children. Roald was furious that people thought his books would harm children. He said the shocking, ghastly junk on TV would kill children's imaginations. Still, some of his own stories were shown on TV. Roald was even a host on 2 shows. Despite his critics, Roald made a lot of money writing for children. He got fan mail from kids all over the world. Roald said in an interview, "I'm probably more pleased with my children's books than with my adult short stories. Children's books are harder to write. It's tougher to keep a child interested because a child doesn't have the concentration of an adult. The child knows the television is in the next room." The Dahls now had a home in Great Missenden, England. It was called Gypsy House. Roald did his writing in a small hut in the garden. The hut was a private hideaway where no one really bothered him. A plastic curtain covered the windows of the hut. Drawings, photos, and various souvenirs hung on the walls. The worn linoleum floor was littered with pencil shavings, cigarette ashes, and dust. It was never swept. Roald didn't have a desk. He wrote on a green felt-covered board that rested on his knees. He sat in an old chair of his mother's. The back of the chair had a big hole cut out for the sake of Roald's bad back. Next to his chair was a table with all sorts of odd things on it. A ball of foil candy wrappers, gifts from fans, a geode, these are crystals, and some very old pottery pieces. Here's an illustration of Roald's hut, and an illustration of the board he sat on his table full of collectible items. Oddest of all things, Roald kept a piece of his own hip that had been removed during surgery. And there was a small bottle with tiny bits of spine floating in it. The hut was a quirky place, but Roald was comfortable there. Roald's day usually began at 9:30 a.m. First, he went through his fan mail with his secretary. He tried to answer all the letters from kids. Some letters were from sick and injured children. Roald tried to help each of them. He visited kids in the hospital. He once bought a wheelchair for a little girl. From 10:30 until lunchtime, he wrote in his hut. After lunch at the house, he might read for a while. Then he'd go back to his hut to write for a couple more hours until supper time. It was said he only slept 3 or 4 hours a night. He was very picky about his writing. He rewrote again and again. For every page he wrote, he might throw away 3. He said he could never get anything right the first time. It could take him a year to finish a book. He couldn't type, so he wrote on yellow paper with a certain kind of yellow pencil. He would give the messy pages to his secretary, who typed them up. His secretary loved being the first person to read everything. I think I would have really liked that job. Roald was rarely happy with any book when he finished it, and right away he would start to worry that he wouldn't be able to come up with a good idea for the next book. The dedication in Danny, the Champion of the World is to Roald's whole family, Pat, Tessa, Theo, Ophelia, Lucy. The book came out in 1975. The dedication makes it sound as if the Dahls were close and happy, but that was not so. Pat and Roald's long marriage was falling apart. Chapter 10, the last chapter. 3 years after her stroke, Patricia Neal was working again. She acted in a TV commercial. Pat became good friends with the woman who chose clothes for the actors in the commercial. Her name was Felicity Crossland. Felicity, Lissy, pronounced Lissy, was divorced. Lissy and her 3 daughters spent a lot of time with the dolls. They even went on vacations together. Pat didn't notice that Roald and Lissy were falling in love. They kept it secret for 10 years. Over time, Pat and Roald had grown further and further apart. After being married for 30 years and raising 5 children, Pat and Roald got a divorce in 1983. There's an illustration of Patricia Neal. That's the wife. In 1968, Patricia Neal finally returned to the movies, and the subject was roses. It still had been hard for her to learn her lines, but she was nominated for an Academy Award. As she got older, Pat was often seen in parts on TV. The story of her illness and recovery was made into a TV movie in 1981. Pat gave speeches and inspired people with challenges. She worked to help children and adults with brain injuries. She established a rehab center in her hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. Patricia died of lung cancer in 2010 at age 84. Wow. Roald married Lissy in 1983. He was 67 and she was 45. It was the beginning of the most productive time of Roald's life. It was also the time when he began his partnership with illustrator Quentin Blake. Lissy said about her husband, "He was not an easy man, but to me he was the most stimulating man in the world and the best husband a woman could ever have." Roald was a man with many interests. He enjoyed photography, playing sports, raising dogs, and collecting art. He loved antiques and actually owned antique shops with his children. He liked to restore old furniture. He kept vegetable and flower gardens. He grew prize-winning orchids. He collected wine. It was no wonder Lissy found him so fascinating. With all of his hobbies, it's amazing that Roald found time to write. Besides his children's novels, Roald wrote 2 books about his own life. Boy, in 1984, was about his childhood and school days. Going Solo in 1986 was about his war adventures. Both books are very entertaining. However, not all the events are completely true. Roald was a storyteller after all. There's Quentin Blake. Quentin Blake illustrated many books by Roald Dahl. He did the artwork in The Enormous Crocodile, The Twits, The Witches, George's Marvelous Medicine, The Giraffe and the Pelly and Me, Revolting Rhymes, S.E.O. Trot, and Dirty Beasts, a book of poems, to name a few. Quentin Blake's illustrations were quirky, funny, and lively. Roald thought they were perfect for his stories. Roald described him as the finest illustrator of children's books in the world today. In 1982, they worked on the BFG, The Big Friendly Giant, which became one of Roald's favorite books. It's one of mine, too. Roald actually changed the description of the giant when he saw Quentin's sketches. The giant looked better wearing sandals instead of the high boots that Roald had first described. Quentin drew the giant to look like Roald. I didn't know that. That's cool. Matilda was one of Roald's last books. He had a hard time working on it. His health wasn't good. At one point, he started all over and rewrote every word. Matilda was an instant bestseller when it came out in 1988. Roald wrote S.E.O. Trot, The Min Pins, and some adult stories. He wrote a cookbook with Lissy. His brain wasn't slowing down, but his body was. Roald was diagnosed with a rare blood disease. On November 23, 1990, Roald Dahl died at age 74. His family buried him near his house with some pencils and wine and chocolates. Right up to the end, Roald kept working on new ideas. One was about a girl and her dog who understood each other's languages. What a loss not to read that story. His life was full of wonderful ups and terrible downs. Roald Dahl was an up and down person too. Charming one minute, nasty the next. Self-centered, then generous. His family sometimes found him difficult, but they loved him very much. As Lissy said, he was a sparky man. What does that mean? In Danny the Champion of the World, Roald had written, a stodgy parent is no fun at all. What a child wants and deserves is a parent who is sparky. So sparky means interesting, funny, energetic, and young at heart. Roald Dahl was a sparky writer as well. His books were exciting and funny, imaginative, and sometimes even scary. He understood what children found interesting. He would be proud to know that many children all over the world love to read because of his books. This is the Roald Dahl Foundation. Roald Dahl wanted the money that he made to go to good causes while he was alive. He was generous towards many hospitals, charities, and individuals. After he died, Lissy started the Roald Dahl Foundation to continue giving to worthy causes. It has now become Roald Dahl's marvelous children's charity. Because so many people in Roald's family suffered brain injuries, the charity gives grants in neurology, the study of the brain. Roald believed that reading was very important. He supported causes that helped kids read and write. If you go to Great Missenden, England, today, you can visit the Roald Dahl Museum and Story Center. Today, 10% of the author royalties made from Roald Dahl's works go to charities. In 2010, one publisher sold a book by Roald Dahl every 5 seconds. That's a lot of money. Here's a picture of him working in his old age towards the end. And here is all the different books for children. The Gremlins, James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, Danny the Champion of the World, The Twits, George's Marvelous Medicine, The BFG, Dirty Beasts, The Witches, Boy, Tales of Childhood, Going Solo, and Matilda. And then here are movies that were made by Roald Dahl's books. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Danny the Champion of the World, Dirty Beasts, Revolting Rhymes, The Witches, The BFG, James and the Giant Peach, Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory when it was remade, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. And then in the back they even include a timeline. So he was born in 1916, and it compares it to the timeline of the world, which is pretty cool. And then the bibliography, which is where they got the information from. So, who was Roald Dahl? A young boy who raced tricycles with his sister, a heroic pilot in World War II, one of the most famous children's book authors of all time. All of the above. He sure was. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning who Roald Dahl was. I know I sure did. I know there were some parts in this book that were difficult, but it's real life, and sometimes life is difficult. So this was the true story of his life. I hope you enjoyed it.